Hello and welcome to Correspondence, our weekly selection of reports from our network of correspondents around the world. This week takes us to Canada, where, as elsewhere, the pandemic has been particularly harsh on the elderly. We have a happier report from Brussels, where Café Terrace has reopened after a 7-month closure. We'll take a look at one report also from California, where a new Olympic sport is being practiced ahead of the Summer Games. But our first report this week takes us to Benin. The West African country has invested a lot of money in renovating the port of Ouidah. Now, that was one of the main departure points during the slave trade for slaves leaving Africa for the New World. Now, the idea is to commemorate the past, heal the wounds of the past, but also invest in Benin's future, as this memorial site will be a source of tourism revenue for the country.
Ouidah has long kept silent. The coastal city never truly faced its past as a former slave trading port. With the end of Marxism 30 years ago, Benin began acknowledging the history of previously anonymous sites. The old auction market is still named after a white Brazilian who was one of the biggest slave traders of his time. More than 500,000 Africans had their liberty stripped away here.
De la diaspora verront sur les lieux, voyant ce nom, Place Chacha, ils sont frappés, ils sont touchés. Nous sommes en train de mener une lutte pour que cette plaque puisse quitter les lieux, pour qu'on puisse reconnaître officiellement que c'était en réalité l'ancienne place aux enchères.
Despite the painful past the name stirs up, some are still against renaming the square. A local development group says nothing would be gained by removing references to the city's biggest slave trader, who was also an influential political figure in the ancient kingdom of Abomey.
Qu'il ait fait du bien ou qu'il ait fait du mal, on ne réécrit pas les pages de l'histoire. Il va falloir immortaliser tous ceux qui ont pris une part de responsabilité quand même dans l'histoire de l'IA.
Since the 90s, the journey taken by thousands of chained Africans has been part of a historical tour. At the end of this road is a warehouse that was used to keep men and women before their departure. It was the last stop before they left their home continent forever. Jeffrey comes from a family of boatmen. His forefathers carried captives to the waiting slave ships.
Nous étions obligés d'amener les esclaves dans les pirogues vers les bateaux négriers, sinon on est décapité.
While the exact numbers will never be known, some 12.5 million Africans were forced onto the ships between the 17th and 19th centuries.
Our next report takes us to Canada, where COVID-19 exposed just how under-resourced the country is when it comes to care facilities for the elderly. 7 out of 10 elderly Canadians in long-term care died during the first lockdown. And not just from COVID-19, others died from being undernourished, lack of hydration, and even isolation and loneliness. Put simply, many of them died from lack of care. Now, it's been a very harsh reckoning for Canadians who are being forced to take a long, hard look at how their elders are being cared for in their final years. This report by François Rouet and Gloria Enriquez.
Nicole's mother was among 5,000 senior citizens who died during the first wave of the pandemic, but she didn't die from COVID-19.
8 days before her death, the doctor called to tell me that my mother was completely dehydrated.
Due to COVID restrictions, the nursing home went into lockdown. Nicole's mother, who was fine a few weeks before, was left to her own devices. There was not enough staff. The staff left behind were completely overwhelmed.
I was watching her on the camera I set up in her bedroom. I could see she was suffering.
Nicole was left helpless watching on her phone as her mother passed away. She's one of many victims highlighting Quebec's long-term care crisis. According to the province, it's in many of these homes that nearly 3/4 of the region's COVID-19 victims died during the first wave.
Care homes weren't ready at all for this crisis.
Several inquiries have reached the same conclusion across Quebec and other provinces, including Ontario, where the pandemic's third wave rages on. The province is in lockdown. The third wave hit Toronto so hard it overtook Montreal as the epicenter of the pandemic. Candace Rennick has worked in healthcare for seniors for 20 years. She believes lessons weren't learned from the first wave.
What our members are experiencing is complete and total burnout, and the government has done nothing to retain and attract staff. So in fact, the crisis has gotten much worse.
Here, the second wave has claimed more lives than the first. For-profit healthcare companies have seen large-scale outbreaks in the nursing homes they manage. Researcher Tamara Daly believes the company's business model needs to be reviewed.
The for-profit homes take funding out, so they're not adding to their staffing levels in the same way that you would find with public and nonprofit homes. In Canada, we don't tend to really value older people, like just as a general rule.
Quebec's health ministry is promising an exhaustive action plan and the end of private facilities without government funding. In Ontario, an independent public inquiry concluded there was no plan to protect residents in long-term care.
To Belgium next, and a happier topic as cafe and restaurant terraces reopened after almost 7 months of being shut. Now, despite inclement weather, Belgians were in festive mood and keen to celebrate this key moment or key step towards normalisation after a year like no other.
They've been waiting for this moment for more than 7 months. These young Brusselites made sure they arrived very early to enjoy their first drinks with friends at a bar. They're eager to take advantage of this refound freedom before the terraces close at 10 p.m.
On n'a plus forcément la possibilité de voir ses amis en dehors de chez soi ou bêtement être à l'extérieur, en poser une terrasse. Certes, il fait pas spécialement beau, mais ça fait vraiment plaisir de pouvoir se retrouver en terrasse avec ses amis, comme on dit.
No more than 4 people are allowed to share a table. That's one of the conditions. But even with a small crowd, it's a joyous occasion.
Il fait froid, mais c'est pas grave. On s'est équipé, donc on est très content de revenir.
And for now, the owner is also in a festive mood. At the same time, sticking to all the hygiene rules hasn't been easy. The Belgian authorities at first had demanded that all establishments install plastic screens, but they backtracked just a day before the terraces reopened.
Je dis que c'est typiquement belge, parce que voilà, quoi, ça n'a aucun sens. Qu'est-ce que des plexis auraient dérangé, en fait, pour séparer les gens? Parce que, franchement, moi, j'ai mis toi à 1,50 m, mais au bout d'un moment, les tables bougent, les chaises bougent. Enfin, voilà, je comprends pas. Et nous, l'investissement, on les a fait nous-mêmes. Donc, on a 10 plexis à l'intérieur qui ont été fabriqués spécialement pour ça. Et puis, on nous dit, non, voilà, donc de l'argent à la poubelle.
Next, restaurant owners are hoping for the complete reopening of their establishments. It's a rollback of safety measures, which has only been possible due to the improving indicators of the pandemic in Belgium. The vaccination rate is picking up. Currently, more than a third of the adult population has received their first shot.
Now, we're familiar with figure skating as an art and a sport with its rightful place in the Olympic Games. But what about skateboarding? Well, this summer, skateboarding is going to make its debut at the Tokyo Olympics as an Olympic sport. And it all started in the 1960s in California when skateboarding came into being. Pierrick Leron sent us this report from the Golden State about the birthplace of skateboarding and where it is now today.
All together and training under the California palm trees, Vincent Melot, Aurélien Giraud, and Vincent Matron are the 3 French athletes nearly qualified for the 2021 Olympics. And for them, the training here is no less intense than that of other professional athletes.
No, we don't have a team that says you need to do this to win. It's not like a classic sport. You need to spend as much time on your board as possible and fall off it. That's how you learn.
Failing and starting over. That's how the 3 of them learned on streets and at the skate park. At only 24 years old, the Olympics are a challenge that they hadn't really considered.
We're really relaxed about the Olympics, so we're trying to not get too worked up about it.
Over the past few weeks, most of their time has been spent with sponsors. At the heart of skate culture are videos like this, shot over many months and compiled by brands of boards and clothing.
The Olympics is just a few hours in the life of a skater, and if it doesn't work out, well, then no one remembers you. But this, you see you at your best for 3 minutes, but you took a year to film it. So I'm definitely prouder of that than the Olympics. Unless I win, of course, I'd be happy.
But if the world of skateboarding is looking to the Olympics with some suspicion, it is also because the history of the sport is relatively recent. At 64 years old, David Ferry is one of the pioneers of the sport, created by surfers in California in the 1960s.
People wanted to have that same kind of feeling when the waves were not good. So, first came this. But the wheels were pretty dangerous. They didn't roll too well if the surface wasn't totally clean.
Together with his friends, he practiced in the empty pools of Los Angeles villas. In 1978, he traveled to France to promote skateboarding and even made the cover of one of the very first magazines devoted to the sport. For him, the Olympic Games are a major milestone.
It started off as delinquent kids having fun. When I was skateboarding, a popular bumper sticker was, skateboarding is not a crime. Well, skateboarding is now so not a crime, it's being accepted into the Olympics, and it's thrilling.
In Tokyo, a new page will be turned in the history of skateboarding. But for those who've gotten it all the way there, the hope is that it will not lose its soul.
Okay, that brings us to the end of this week's show. Special thanks to Armelle Coe and Marion Laurie. And we're going to leave you with these scenes from a Paris skate park here in the 10th arrondissement, and perhaps a future Olympian in our midst. Thanks for watching.